Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Grace of a Military Child and Life podcast. Military families are not like your traditional family. They are strong, brave, resilient, and some of the most incredible people I know. My name is Gracie, a U.S. Army BRAT, and I am your host. I am honored to be able to give military family members like myself a place for them to share their stories and experiences in the military life. Stay tuned for this week's guest. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of Grace of Military Child and Life. Today, I'm super excited to be here with Kelly, who is a military brat, an Army brat, and also a Gold Star child. So, Kelly, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Yeah. So, you have got the kind of worst, end of the spectrum of being a military child, kind of not what anyone expects to happen. Well, I should say we kind of expect it, but we hope for it not to happen. But can you just give us an insight of what it was like for you growing up as a military child?
Yeah, absolutely. I write about it a lot and I talk about it a lot. And I kind of say like I made it through the ultimate Army brat experience.
Yeah.
My dad served, he was a West Point grad. He served in the United States Army for 24 years. And so we grew up, he was an Army aviator, so we moved every couple of years. We lived in Fort Rucker, we lived overseas in Germany. I was actually born in Germany and then moved
Oh,
back when I was in
wow.
Yeah. And so we did the whole like moving all the time, friends all over the world. And it was honestly, it was great. Growing up in the military in the 90s, it was, every little town was kind of like its own little Mayberry. We knew everybody from different moves along the way. And then when I was 18 years old, my dad, we were stationed at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and he worked for the Basic Command Training Program, BCTP. And he basically was helping a battalion out of Fort Drum, New York, to deploy to Kandahar. And he flew into Afghanistan on what was supposed to be a 2-week mission. And while he was still in Kabul, he hadn't even been in Afghanistan for 24 hours. His convoy was hit by a suicide bomber and he was killed in action. And so I was 18 years old. We had, thought that in a couple of years we'd be celebrating his retirement. And instead we were faced with a completely different reality. And I but I became a part of this community that I never even like dreamed was, like you said, we know that it's a possibility.
Right.
We know that it's there, but you don't think about it. And especially with someone who's at the end of their career. And so I feel like Gold Star families always say it's a club that you never hope to join, but once you're in it, you're in it. I've met some of the most incredible people in my life, some of the most life-changing people since becoming a Gold Star family member. But yeah, it definitely was world jarring when it happened. But I am grateful for the 18 years that I got to be an Army brat and grow up in that world and that community, because as you share on your podcast and talk to people, it is just such a unique life. It's such a unique way to grow up.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, it's a bit of a different aspect because you were much older when your dad was killed in action. And a lot of, these Gold Star children, from the OEF, OIF wars were much younger when they lost their parents. So they didn't necessarily grow up around their parent. They didn't have, that traditional military brat lifestyle, moving around, still being actively involved in it prior to the incident.
Yeah. Yeah. Because how old, I know that your father was wounded in action. How old were you?
Yeah, I was 9. So it was, at a point where I still remembered it and still, and obviously, you deal with a lot of the grief aspect, but, we got the grief, but from the different aspect of like continuing and recovery and constant, recovery, which is, it's kind of weird talking with like Gold Star children versus like wounded children because, we get that constant, like every day is still recovery, every day is still that. And it's not necessarily like comparing traumas, but it's like, you
No,
know, it's like it happens, it's over. You
it is.
find a way to grieve and move on in a sense.
But it's also something that like is life altering, and it's life altering
Right,
because of this experience of being a military child.
right.
So neither you or I would ever have had this life altering experience had we not grown up in the military lifestyle. And so yeah, so it's just but yeah, there's I don't know. It's crazy. It's a crazy life. But
It is. And we
I do
just kind of have
think
to go
the
with it.
average, yeah, exactly. You don't have a choice.
Yeah.
I do think like the average age of, that sadly someone becomes a Gold Star child from Iraq and Afghanistan, it was for a while, like I think 3 to 5 years old or something. Like
Yeah.
it was much, much younger. And so, yeah, it gave me, I guess, like a little bit of a different look at it, a little bit of a different look at growing up in the military.
Yeah. And it's kind of cool because, especially like you mentioned, you were born in Germany and then you had the opportunity to go back there. So, like, you still really had all of those incredible experiences of being
Yeah.
a military child.
Yeah. And I was a military child for the first half of my 10 years of my military child life were pre 9/11, which I
Right.
mean, there was conflict and there were things happening, and that wasn't like our parents were totally not in harm's way, but it was a totally different military world to grow up in,
Right.
than the second half, which was when we were in two different wars. And so yeah, so it's kind of a weird when I think back at it, like I think I had this like idealistic mentality about being a military child. It was very like all the parents were similar, all the kids were the same age, all of our friends were very, it was very, I don't know. But
Yeah.
at the same time, our underlying life was that danger and that service that was always right around the corner and was always a possibility.
Right.
So,
Do you remember kind
so
of like what that transition from like pre 9/11 to post 9/11, like where you were when that day happened? Like, do you remember that?
yeah, we were stationed in Germany.
Oh my gosh.
We moved to Germany in August of 2001, and I was 10 years old, and we lived in Giebelstadt, and we lived right outside of the little military airfield. And I remember like the helicopters flew really low over our houses because we were in like a military American community. And
Right.
my dad was actually on post. We lived off post and he couldn't leave. We also couldn't go on post. So it was just a very like, my mom, I didn't understand what was happening. And I certainly didn't understand the magnitude of what was happening. But I
Right.
do remember feeling just very afraid for our entire community. My family's from New Jersey. So we had family members that were all down that, work in New York City and were around this area. I'm living in right outside of New York City right now. And so, yeah, it was a heavy day, but yeah, even through it, I don't think you really realize. And even as we moved through these wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, I think as a kid, you don't really think about the magnitude and what's actually happening. So,
Right. Especially at that age, because, my dad served in Afghanistan and you think back to, I mean, like I said, I was 9 when he got hurt, but even at that age, I think it's really hard to grasp what's really going on. You kind of feel it
right.
in your surroundings,
Mhm.
but like I could not imagine, I learn about it, live through the post of it, but I could not imagine living in those days of 9/11 actually
Yeah.
happening. And then
Yeah.
especially adding on that you're in another country too.
Right. So it was definitely strange and weird, but I think kids are pretty resilient.
Right.
It didn't necessarily define our time in Germany. We still had a lot of fun. We still went like and did things. But I do remember, and I've written about this a little bit, but I do remember we went to Thanksgiving. My dad was in the field, so he was training one Thanksgiving, and we had friends that lived in Illesheim, which was another base, like about an hour away from us. And we went to their house for Thanksgiving, and their dad had just gotten deployed. And I remember that was the first time I'd known someone who got deployed or who had to like, that was the first time I had to think about deployment. in that
Right.
way. And it was just, I do remember feeling like, is it okay for me to talk about? Is it okay for me to ask about what your dad's
Right.
doing? Like, is this, are you sad? Or what, like what? And I don't think, I mean, I think we were kids and we didn't actually, I didn't have like a heart to heart with my like 10-year-old BFF, but
Not
it
like you would
was,
as a teenager or adult.
yeah, right. And so I think we just played and ran around and played with their dog. And, but it was, I do remember having that feeling of like, oh, wow, this is a really sad, scary thing. And then moving on from it because I was a kid, but it, it started, you know, that lifestyle that you grew up with and that became kind of just the normal in our existence was a parent deployed all the time. You always had friends who were
Right.
parents were deployed. If it wasn't your parent, it was your friends. And, you know, and it was just kind of a constant in our lives. So,
At that point, like having your friends' parents deployed, did you kind of starts to get the feeling that your dad was going to deploy soon?
yeah, he was training a lot in Germany. I think, I don't know what he was doing training. They were just, I'm like,
Just doing something.
they were out in the field. They would go TDY to the field. And I'm like, I don't know what they did. But, yeah, I did think about that and wondered like when he would. And he didn't deploy. So after Germany, he took on a training position in Fort Rucker, Alabama. And so he didn't actually deploy for the first time until 2007. So it was quite long. He made like that
Yeah.
and I was a junior in high school.
Wow.
So
That's like a
yeah,
really rough age. I would at least think to experience a deployment for the first time.
yeah, yeah, it was because he like I was looking at colleges.
Right.
He coached some of my soccer teams, and then I started playing on a more competitive club soccer team. And so while it was difficult, there was also like I was able to email and kind of be in charge of my own communication with him. Whereas my
Yeah.
youngest brother, we're 14 years apart, and so he was like 3 years old at the time. And so it's a completely different, you know, experience of a
Right.
deployment because your parent just kind of disappears or isn't there, which is different now, I guess, with like FaceTime. I feel like I'm like dating myself, like back when we had to write hand letters and no, but
Right.
yeah, but I could email. I emailed with my dad a lot, and looking back now, it is special to have some of those correspondence
Yeah.
that I wouldn't otherwise have. So yeah,
Yeah, because it's those lasting memories that, you wouldn't have, you know, to a point, like having FaceTime is nice, right? Being able to see your loved one, interact with them on a real time basis. But at the same point, like if something does happen that's tragic, then you don't necessarily have, video playback of
right,
those moments, but you have the copy that, you
yeah,
messaged back with your dad.
yeah. So yeah.
Yeah.
But it was, I don't know, it was, you just kind of go through it and it kind of is, you know, everybody else that was around me, their parents had deployed or were deployed. So it wasn't like, I don't know, it's sad, but it's something that everybody's going through together. And so
Right.
that kind of helps ease it a little bit.
Yeah. And like you said, kids are resilient. Kids in general as a whole are resilient, but then adding military kids and looking at just military kids specifically, I mean, that's part of BRAT, right? So,
Yeah.
military kids were just born and raised in this resilient lifestyle where we really don't have another choice but to be resilient and but to carry on. So I think that definitely plays a huge part and a huge role in helping us kind of get through that lifestyle and also relying
Yeah.
on the community around us to get through
Yeah.
that lifestyle.
Yeah. Because your whole world, your whole life is like, there's nothing that's about you
Right.
specifically. Like, whole life is really about the military. Like, your parents
Right.
don't really have they can have kind of a choice of where they go or what career path, like if they want to be, you know, whatever they do. But it really is what the Army says goes. Like, if they're going to miss a birth or if they're going to miss this or that, like, it is just kind of in charge. And so I think as a kid growing up, you kind of just learn to like I don't know, I think you just don't know any other way. And so that does just make you very resilient, very able to like go with the flow. And yeah, like my dad came back from his deployment right before my senior year of high school, and he went to the Army. He was appointed to the Army War College. But that would mean we moved for my senior year of high
Right.
school. I like had a boyfriend and I was in high school. And
It
I don't want to move.
was a
And
pivotal
it was
point.
just, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we did and we moved. And
Right.
I mean, it was an amazing year because it was the year before he ended up dying. And so, it was incredible to have that time together as a family. And we didn't know that at the time. But I think when I was like in high school, as hard as it was also just known to me and pretty much all of my friends, like, oh, this is what we do. We're military
Yeah.
kids. And it stinks. It was hard that I moved my senior year of high school, but yeah. So,
And then looking back in hindsight too, like everything happens for a reason. And so like you had that extra year where, yes, like you said, it sucks being moved from, the high school you were in, your
yeah,
boyfriend, like getting ready as, a group to be able to graduate high school and move into the real world.
yeah.
But like you had that extra time to spend with your family.
Yeah, and the Army War College, I guess all of the different war colleges, it basically, my dad was a college student for a year or for 10 months. And so his schedule was that of a college student. And so,
Right.
like, home for breakfast, he was home early or he'd be studying late, but he didn't have, it wasn't, especially coming off of a deployment, he wasn't gone in the normal like 9 to 5. And so my family traveled a lot. We were close to our family in New Jersey, so we got to see them a lot. And so it really turned into being like just such an special, important year in all of
Right.
our lives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So,
And then, kind of fast forwarding, but you and your family started the Johnny Mac Soldiers Fund. And so, can you share about that?
yeah, absolutely. So like I mentioned, my dad went to West Point. He was the class of 1986. And after he died, a few of his classmates got together and they just wanted to make sure that my siblings and I, there's 5 of us all together. That's a lot, but not no small undertaking right there.
Right.
But they just want to make sure that we were all taken care of throughout college. And so they kind of raised money among themselves and they started their own Johnny Mac fund. But then as it started getting bigger, they knew it was something special and they knew they wanted to expand it and grow it in my dad's memory. And so actually 10 years ago, just this past week, in April, they established, or it was their 10-year anniversary of the Johnny Mac Soldiers Fund, of when they were an established nonprofit. And their goal is basically to give back to the military community, especially those whose kids whose parent was killed or wounded, through education. And so they fund scholarship organizations, they fund scholars. Yeah, they've done incredible work, raised millions of dollars. I think they've helped over 6,000 students throughout their 10 years. Yeah. And so it really, what started out as just like some of my dad's friends wanting to help out us, snowballed into the Johnny Mac Soldiers Fund, and or the Mariana will not be. And I said wrong. Johnny Mac. It is Johnny Mac Soldiers Fund. Right. I don't know. I was thinking foundation and but yeah, so what started out as a way to help the 5 of us and be there for my siblings snowballed into this amazing, life-changing organization. Yeah, and I'm so passionate about education and the work they do. I don't know if I was passionate about education before them or if they kind of instilled that in me, but I've always worked in higher ed. And I've always been involved with military nonprofits, especially Johnny Mac Soldiers Fund. And yeah, I think they're amazing and I'm so grateful to them.
Yeah,
So
I love that. And I'm so grateful to have been, one of the part of an organization that Johnny Mac Soldiers Fund sponsors. And, I don't think, at certain ages of life, you realize how impactful higher education is and how impactful just these scholarships coming in to support you during those years. Because, I mean, let's face it, college is expensive. It's not cheap. It's not easy to attain, but it's so important. And so having just scholarship organizations see what you've been through as a military child, whether that be Gold Star or, wounded in action, like having somebody realize what you've been through, even though, like, I will say to this day, like, I did nothing. Like, I just, stood by my dad and stood by my family, but they realize what you did and the impact that you have had on your family. And they honor that. And that is such a special feeling. And, I wouldn't be where I am today either without, these scholarships and Johnny Mac Soldiers Fund for helping, my education and, so many others as well.
Right. Because like getting an education too at that age in your life or whenever you do it it's so much more than even just the classes. And so having someone pick up the bill for your tuition or helping relieve that with your tuition, that can make such a huge difference. It's like for me, I was able to take on unpaid internships because I could, whereas other friends of mine, like they couldn't afford to take on unpaid internships. But I was able to intern with the MLS and I worked for a local newspaper and didn't make a lot of money. But because I had support, I was able to do these things that also launched the trajectory of my career as a writer. And so I think sometimes even like obviously the tuition and the paying is so life-changing and so huge, but what that offers college students is even bigger sometimes than I think even the people donating and the board members even think about. And so it's really cool what they've been able to do and all of like the opportunities and experiences that they've been able to create for us, for kids like us.
Right. So. Yeah. Because like you said, it's not just, writing a check and sending it off. It's being able to take on those unpaid internships, being able to volunteer and, give back and really find your place because, similar to you, like I found that my passion is the military community and giving back to, I always say the community that made me who I am. So, it's so special to even just network with different people and have that opportunity because, these people are willing to step in and willing to help you and help you further your career and kickstart your life.
Yeah. And it is, I think, growing up without kind of that like hometown or being from one place, it is when your parent is like tragically removed from that world. I think early on, it was just like, what is home? What am I, if not in the military? Like we don't have that connection to it anymore. And so to see people that say like, no, you still are connected and this is still your home and these are still your people. It's really cool. It's a really good feeling. Even, in my 30s now, it's like, no, this is my home. It's the military is how I grew up and it is who I grew up as. And to see people who, poured into that, even after we were out of it, is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And then
my younger brother, he was 5 when my dad was killed. And so he is just now of college age. So he grew up very, very differently than me. He didn't grow up in the traditional military family as, like I had. But to see how many people are still so invested in him and it's still his community, even not having grown up on post and growing up in a little bit of a different way, it's really cool too. So.
Yeah. And everyone, no matter the age, you are still part of the military community. And the military community, like, it is one of the most special things. And it's so, you try to explain it to someone else and you just can't. It's one of those things that you have to be part of to know. But, even at that age, you just surround, the entire family as a whole. And it's one of those communities that I feel never leaves you. And so even, it could be a decade of not speaking to someone and then they come back around and you're like, oh no, like this, I'm still part of this community. And that's the best feeling in the world.
Yeah. And I always growing up in the military, I always grew up surrounded by the military. And
Right.
so now I live in Hoboken, New Jersey, and I work in New York City. And like there isn't as big of a military presence here. Like meeting someone
Right.
with military background or connection is kind of like it's very rare.
Yeah.
And so I met just a couple weeks ago on the playground. There was a dad there with his kid, and he grew up in the military, and his dad was stationed at Fort Leavenworth. And it was just like such a random connection. And it does feel like meeting someone from your hometown or seeing
Yeah.
someone from your hometown, even though I never knew, we didn't know each other growing up in the military, but we had all of these things in common. And so you exactly said it, even like decades later, you can meet someone and you've had this shared experience that's really, really powerful and really brings you together. So,
Right. Because that's
yeah.
just the basis of this lifestyle is shared experiences. And if you don't have, you know, or if you do meet someone, another military child, another military spouse, even another service member or veteran, like you can instantly connect with them on these shared experiences. And it's like you've known them your whole life, even though you
Yeah,
just met
absolutely.
them.
Yep. Oh yeah. Pretty much anytime I meet someone with military background out here, I'm like, hi, do you want to be my best friend? So,
Right.
my military friends all know that. They're probably all like, okay, Kelly, come down. We can talk about something else.
It does
So
not revolve around the military life, but that's what we grew up knowing is that everything revolves around the military life. So,
yeah,
it's just
absolutely.
ingrained in us.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the last thing I want to ask you is what piece of advice would you give to another military child
Yeah.
or Gold Star child, even?
Right. Well, I think Gold Star child specifically, but also military child, it could go in towards anybody, is just find your community. This doesn't even have to be people you talk to every single day, but the one of the biggest ways that I was able to heal and grow and kind of come out of my dad's death even stronger was the Gold Star family community. I did a lot with Children of Fallen Patriots Foundation. I did a lot with TAPS. And while my friends were always there for me and still are there for me in incredible ways, the first time I went to an event with Fallen Patriots and I went to an event with TAPS, and TAPS is the Tragedy Assistance Program for survivors. It was just such an amazing feeling to be around people where you don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to,
Right.
you can talk and I don't know. It is a really, really great thing to find your community of surviving family members. And the same thing with military, with grow is just like having those connections where you don't have to explain when someone asks you where you're from, why, like there's 1,000 things. So I think
Right.
just make that community really close. And even if it's not someone that you talk to every single day, but just kind of keep on fostering those relationships, and sticking with them. My best friend, we're in Fort Rucker or Fort Novosel in Alabama, together. And after my dad was killed, we were both freshmen in college and she was at a small school down in Alabama and she drove right up.
Oh,
And even
wow.
now we're like still so close. But we actually never lived somewhere together longer than like a few years because we moved
Right.
and um, so I think even though we don't talk every single day, it's like this bond that I think we recognize that as military children we really had throughout our, young adult years. Um, and so just like really, I've been, not that it's hard to be intentional because she's an amazing friend, but I've been really intentional with that relationship because
Right.
some people just grow up around the same people and have these relationships. If you've grown up in the same hometown forever, it's not necessarily easy, but sometimes you just have relationships that are. And I
It's more
think in our world,
natural.
yeah, it's a little bit easier to maybe like lose touch or lose those relationships, but to be able to really find your community and stick with it and check in on people is really powerful and is even when you're removed from it as much as, maybe I am now, it's still just it's a great thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And where can listeners find more out about Johnny Mac Soldiers Fund and support the organization?
So their website is johnnymac.org, and you can find out all about the Johnny Mac Soldiers Fund. You can find out about their upcoming events. You can, I think I have a story that I wrote for them probably ages ago. But yeah, if you have any questions about Johnny Mac Soldiers Fund, about me, or you want to talk, my website is kellymchughstewart.com, and my email and everything are on there. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for being on the podcast and sharing about your entire experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so nice so much of my work and my world is wrapped up in my dad's death, and that, is a huge passion of mine to work with Gold Star families. But there's so much joy in talking about being a military child and growing up in that community. And so I'm really grateful for you for focusing on that and talking about that.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for listening to Grace of a Military Child and Life podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to give it a like, follow, and comment. Also, be sure to check out Instagram and Facebook at Grace of a Military Child and Life for more awesome content. For information on the podcast, Military Child Bigs and Littles, GoAMCL blog, or other resources, visit www.goamcl.org. You can also email me at Gracie, that's GRACIE, @goamcl.org with any questions or comments. To be a guest on the podcast, you can schedule it at www.goamcl.org/schedule a podcast, all one word, or contact me via social media or email. Stay tuned for the next episode where another incredible story is shared.